It's time for us to start this 10:30 breakout session. Let's welcome up Dr. McMurtry as he gets ready to speak.
Try this. There it is. Sorry. I was distracted. What can I say? Remember, however, this is like trying to teach after lunch because you just had all this sweet stuff out there. I noticed nobody touched the vegetables. But I'm right in your court. I want you to know this because I take God very seriously. You might have noticed that. And you know, in Genesis 1:26, or I beg your pardon, 29 and verse 30, God created all creatures as vegetarians. But I'm so thankful that I live in this day and time because after the flood, Genesis 9:3, God modified the law and he said, now you shall eat meat. Hello? I mean, what would you rather eat? 3 pounds of vegetables or a 12-ounce steak? But yeah, me too. So if you ever have a meal with me, you'll notice I'm a meativore. Because when God says, now you shall eat meat, I take him seriously. And why should I eat vegetables when the animals have already done it for me? It's a creation thing. What can I say? But now we want to take a look at how did people live to be 900 years old? The subject, again, I have a video. I have a chapter in my book on it, again, through the website, just for your information. But did people really live to be over 900 years old in the past? Remember, the Bible does clearly state that if we take a look at the patriarchs before the flood, if we take out 2 men, you got to take out Enoch, he went alive to heaven, he will die later, and you have to take out a guy named Lamech who died young at 770. Yeah, I asked the Lord one time, why'd this guy die so young at 770 when everybody else was living over 900? I asked the Lord this. Now, I'll tell you what I heard from the Lord, and then you can decide whether it was God or indigestion, okay? What I heard from the Lord was, well, he stepped in a gopher hole, broke his leg, and we had to shoot him. Okay, maybe it was indigestion. But let's think about this. The Bible does say people used to live, men, over 900 years old, an average of 912 if we take out the 2. And women, of course, normally outlive men. We know men lived up to 950. Eve could quite easily have made 1,000 years. Because again, women tend to outlive men, right? We don't know, the Bible doesn't say. But it's not an unreasonable speculation either. Now, if the Bible says it, the world is going to challenge you. The world is going to say, oh, you Christians, you can't possibly believe that people used to live to be 900 years old. You have got to be able to defend this. And so that's what the second session is all about. Now, I am going to show you, maybe not all the way through for time limits, but nonetheless, I'm going to show you there are 19 scientific and medical reasons which, taken in combination, it's not just one thing, but taken in combination, that would have allowed people to live to be 900 years old under the environmental conditions that existed before the flood. Now, from creation to the flood is exactly 1,656 years. And people were living, again, over 900 typically. So let's start off with the scientific ones. The world before the flood was very, very different. First of all, the continents fit together. The concept of Pangea is biblical. Remember that in day 3 of the week of creation, God causes the dry land to rise up out of the water. Remember, day 1, there's water on the surface. Day 2, he creates the waters below and the waters above. There's water on the surface. On day 3, he causes the dry land to rise up out of the water, and he separates the dry land from the water. He gathers the waters into one place. Now, if the water is in one place, where's the land? Come on, folks, the other one place, correct? The concept of Pangea does not belong to evolutionists. It belongs to us. It's a biblical concept. It's not an evolutionary concept. It is a corruption by the evolutionists of the biblical account. But on day 3, if you had looked at the earth from a satellite, 40% of the surface of the earth would have been dry land. almost all of it together in one place, Pangea. Now, we do have the physical evidence to prove that there were islands. There were some islands, not the ones you know today, but there were some before the flood. But almost all the dry land was in one place. Then at the time of the flood, of course, the waters knifed through from below, separating Pangea up into the continents we know today. They moved rapidly in 1 year to where they are today because they're floating on a layer of water. They can slip slide very quickly. That's in another session called The Waters Cleaved. But the world before the flood was very different. 40% of the Earth's surface was dry land. Today it's 30%. Before the flood, it was all arable. You could grow plants everywhere on that 40%. Today, you can't do it all on the 30%. Are you with me? But the world before the flood was very different. And we're going to talk about some of the other environmental differences as we go along. But why don't people live to be 900 years old? I mean, if you think about it, today we only live 1/10 as long as we used to live. Come on, they used to live to be 900. Generally today we're in the 90s, right? With some exceptions, of course. But we only live 1/10 as long as we used to, although I think some of you at least will agree that this is not such a bad thing. Would you agree, ladies? I mean, Eve could have had children for 450 years. Excuse me? I didn't see anybody pass out, but I think a couple of them were getting faint. So there are certain advantages to only living 1/10 as long as we used to. But what is the first factor in how people used to live to be 900 years old? What you see here is a picture of the chromosomes of a human man. Humans have 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs, as you see here. And we know that this is a human male because there's one X and one Y gene here for gender. Now, women have two X's, men have one X and one Y. And anytime I'm doing any presentation where I think that there's some piece of information that would be particularly important to men or particularly important to women, I do point out things that are particularly important to the ladies. But in this particular presentation, I want to point out something very important to the men. So men, are you listening? I repeat that men have one X and one Y chromosome for gender, and women have two X chromosomes, right? Now, guys, this is why women are a doubly unknown quantity to men. Come on, X is an unknown quantity, and they got two. Just saying. Now, think with me for a moment. Here are the 46 chromosomes that make up the human genome. And when God created us, He created us perfect, correct? No mistakes, no errors, no decay. However, the aging process is mostly the decay of genetic information. You see, once human sin came into the universe, one sin made the perfect universe imperfect. And it continues to get more and more imperfect as time goes by. It's like a snowball going downhill. Now, God knows this ahead of time, correct? Because God knows all things. He knows that people are going to sin, so He had a plan of salvation prepared before the creation. Is that right? Come on, you guys can say at least amen or something here. Now, let's think about this. The human DNA, we are decaying, and we are decaying fast. Notice here, human DNA mutates. Now, we talked about mutations, copying errors yesterday, if those of you that were here. But the human DNA mutates at 1,000 mutations to 1 million mutations per cell per day. We are decaying, and we are decaying fast. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's simply true. We are decaying so fast that humans won't be here very much longer if this continues, being a few generations or more at most. But we're decaying, and we're decaying fast. Now, the decay of genetic information is what's involved with the aging process. It's a primary factor. Now, we are accumulating errors at a very fast rate. You see, we are losing 1 to 2% of our genetic information per generation. We are accumulating, oops, yes, here, work. Good dog. Now, we're accumulating approximately 64 mutations from the parents to the next generation. Now, with that in mind, we are decaying fast. But God knows that this is what's going to happen. And he wants people to come around because he wants to add more to the kingdom of God, correct? So with that in mind, what did God do in his foreknowledge? In our DNA, now you have approximately 85 trillion cells. At least the average human has about 85 trillion human cells, some smaller ones, less, larger ones, more, but the average for an adult human is about 85 trillion. Each cell has 1,000 to 1 million copying mistakes per cell per day, right? God knows that. So what did he do? He pre-programmed in our DNA 7 little machines. They are listed here, and they spend their entire day going up and down your chromosomes, correcting the minor mistakes that occur every single day. If it were not for these little machines going up and down and correcting the minor mistakes, you wouldn't even exist. I'd like you to think about it. We are, at this time, losing 1% to 2% of our genetic information per generation. You are approximately the 250th generation since Adam and Eve. There's only been approximately 250 generations since Adam and Eve. Now, if we're losing 1% to 2% of our genetic information today, it doesn't take much math to figure out we ought not to be here. You shouldn't even exist. But God put these 7 little machines in there to correct the little mistakes. Now, it will not correct the big mistakes. It will not correct sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, and so forth. But it does correct the little mistakes that occur every day. And so I'll simply put it this way. Ain't God good? Yes. Oh, come on. Ain't God good? Yes. Yeah, I think so too. Well, what's another scientific thing? Now, here you see the Earth, and the illustration shows the Earth's magnetic field. You are all aware the Earth has a magnetic field. When you were in school, at least they gave you a compass and at least showed it to you in that sense. But here you see the bands of magnetic force around the Earth, right? Here's the situation, though. From the time of creation, we know that the Earth's magnetic field has decayed 95% from what it was at creation. We have lost 95% of the Earth's magnetic field in only 6,000 years. The Earth's magnetic field, we have measured it for 200 years. That's a really big window in modern science. But we know we lose 50% of the magnetic field strength every 1,400 years. So at the time of Jesus, the magnetic field was basically 3 times stronger than today. You go back to the time of the flood, it was 10 times stronger than today. You go back to creation 6,000 years ago, it was 20 times stronger than today. This is actually quite important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it proves that evolution is not true. You see, if you were to go back a supposed 10,000 years, now would you agree 10,000 years to an evolutionist, that's just nothing, right? Right? Okay, look, to an evolutionist, 10,000 years is the width of a human hair between here and downtown Jackson. Hello? But if you go back a mere 10,000 years, you double going back every 1,400. 10,000 years ago, that's just a mere 10,000 years ago, the Earth's magnetic field would be 200 times stronger than today. Under those conditions, no life can exist. How many of you have ever had a medical exam today called an MRI? Magnetic resonance imaging, right? Or if you're from Europe, it's TMI, but you've had it, right? Now, it works on the basis that we put you in a big magnetic field. We magnetically image what you look like on the inside, which again, I think you'll agree is much better than cutting you open. Apparently, you would rather be cut open. Well, anyway, I prefer the MRI myself. Now, I've had about 6. Really cool stuff. But when they gave you that MRI, they didn't hit your body with 200 times magnetic field strength of the Earth, because if they had, after the test was over, we would wipe you off the wall like a bottle of ketchup. Yeah, I hit you with 200 times the magnetic field strength of the Earth today, we would just wipe you off the wall like ketchup. Every single cell in your body would rupture. It tells us the Earth cannot even be 10,000 years old. Perfectly consistent with it being only 6,000, I might add. But the truth of the matter is the Earth can't even be 8,000 years old, but certainly not 10, for the strength of the Earth's magnetic field. But While that limits how old the Earth and the universe are, it also sets a limit on how much longer it's going to last. Let me show you. Now, here is a diagram showing the Earth's magnetic field surrounding the Earth and the deadly solar radiation, the solar wind that comes from the sun. Now, this is ionized radiation. It's plus or minus charged, and because the Earth has a magnetic field, when the plus or minus ionized particles will hit the Earth's magnetic field, they are bent around and come in at the North Pole and at the South Pole, where so few people live. Now, ain't that a good design? What's the matter? You don't think a guy with 2 doctorates can say ain't? Come on. Ain't that a good design, right? I mean, think about this. If the Earth's magnetic field came in at the equator, well, it would eliminate most of the life on Earth. We'd have a little alive in the north, a little alive in the south, but nothing in the middle. There is one planet that has a magnetic field like that, but only one, and fortunately it's not us. But we have planets that don't even have a magnetic field. That radiation just comes straight in. Now, why is this important? Well, the Earth's magnetic field, God put there to protect us from deadly radiation. It causes what's called the northern and southern lights, the aurora borealis, the aurora australis, the northern and southern lights. And they're quite pretty. In my work in Russia, I was many times above the Arctic Circle in the city of Murmansk. It's on the Arctic Ocean, and you can easily see the auroras up there if the weather conditions are correct. And they're very pretty, but they're also very deadly. A few years ago, I lost a friend. She was only 37 years old, the wife of a pastor. I worked at that church many times, and she died from cancer because she had lived her entire life under this deadly radiation. So, why did people used to live longer? Well, one of the reasons, remember, as you go back in time, we double the Earth's magnetic field every 1,400 years. What would that mean? The Earth's magnetic field was stronger and stronger as we go back in time, correct? That would push that deadly radiation farther and farther away from the surface. But as time is going by, as it's decaying, only down to 5% now, the radiation's getting closer and closer to the Earth, and more is leaking through. One of the reasons why cancer rates are going straight up. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. Are you with me? Now, I know most of you are not old enough to remember the space program back in the 60s when we went to the moon. But what is the biggest problem of putting people in space? It is not water, it is not oxygen, it's not weightlessness. The single biggest problem with putting people in space is radiation. Space is a very deadly environment because there's no protection from the radiation that comes from sources like the sun. Whether it's solar radiation or galactic radiation, space is a very dangerous place to be. And it's a problem with shielding our astronauts to keep them from dying from radiation. Now, the illustration here shows, back in the 60s when we were going to the moon, we knew that there were 2 Van Allen radiation belts. This is radiation coming from the sun, trapped by the Earth's magnetic field, and then shunted around to the North and South Pole. Today, we know there's 3. There's a 3rd weak band. But God put 20 times the magnetic field strength at creation to push that deadly radiation away from us, and we lived longer because of that. But today, it's shrinking, and today we're in real trouble. This is an argument scientifically of why the Lord will come back soon. Again, if he doesn't, we will all die from radiation. And then, of course, that the higher humidity. Remember, on day 2, God creates the waters above and the waters below, correct? Now, on day 1, there was water on the surface, right? The waters of creation, there was waters on the surface. But on day 2, God creates the waters above and the waters below. Now, the waters below, as I show in the presentation on the waters cleaved, was a layer of water 1 mile deep, located 10 to 11 miles down. That's the water that flooded the earth at the time of the flood. 99% of the water that flooded the earth came from this layer of water God created on day 2. But he also created waters above. This is not clouds. This is simply some additional humidity. It's not clouds. You know, there's only one planet in the solar system that has a cloud canopy, that's Venus. And this is what makes it so easy to see at night. Before the storm came in last night, I was beautiful view of Mars, but Earlier in the month, there was actually a good view of Venus and Mars very close together. And, well, Venus is the single brightest object in the sky after the moon at night that's natural. There are some lights that are unnatural, made by man, but it's the second brightest natural thing. And why? Why is it so easy to see? Well, first of all, it's completely encased in white cloud. And so the sunlight bounces off of it. It's very easy to see at night. However, I can assure you with absolute certainty, we will never land a human being on Venus. No human being will ever step on Venus. Apparently you do not understand why. Well, you see, would you agree here in Kentucky, in the wintertime, it doesn't cool off as much when it's cloudy as when it's clear, correct? So radiation goes out at night, but if there's clouds, it traps the heat underneath, right? Because of the clouds around Venus, we are never going to go there. First of all, the clouds are made out of sulfuric acid. Hello? Yeah, the clouds are made out of sulfuric acid. That's a bit of a problem, I think. But secondly, because of the clouds that completely surround Venus, the temperature on the surface is slightly above 800 degrees Fahrenheit. If you could stand on the surface of Venus, and you could put a pound of lead in your hand, you could watch it melt in your hand. Hello? We are never going to land a person on Venus. So the Earth did not have a cloud cover, because if that were true, the Earth would have been too hot for life to exist. But the extra moisture did keep it a little warmer, because, of course, again, clouds trap the heat, right? You know, they talk about man-made global warming. This is absolutely not true whatsoever. As a matter of fact, most of the heat trapped in the atmosphere comes from water. I don't know about you, but I don't think that we're involved with that, are we? No. Well, the man-made global warming thing is a total fraud. It's simply a political agenda. But God did put extra moisture in the atmosphere. Now, what did that do? Well, it actually does a variety of things. Sometimes one factor has more than one benefit, okay? Now, before the flood, there were no seasons, but after the flood, Genesis 8:22, now there are seasons. So before the flood, we had sort of one, sort of a homogeneous environment. It was basically subtropical pretty much everywhere. Because of the clouds on Venus, the temperature varies only 4 degrees from the equator to the poles. Even though it's over 800, it only varies by 4 degrees. Well, when the Earth had this moisture, and before it came down at the flood, the 40 days and 40 nights of rain, the Earth was warm all around, 365 days a year, and there were no seasons. But after the flood, God says now, because that moisture did come down in the 40 days and 40 nights of rain, that now we will have seasons, correct? Now, one of the things about Kentucky, and by the way, I got to tell you, I never lived in Kentucky, but I think it's a wonderful state. I have never been to any spot in Kentucky that didn't have a certain kind of pretty. You know, whether it's down in the basins and the bluegrass, or whether it's up here and so forth, I've never found an ugly spot of Kentucky, and I have been all over it. I've been from Pikeville to Clinton. Have you? Clinton's out in the point. But there's a lot of farming that goes on along up here, right? What is the single greatest problem that a farmer has to deal with? The single greatest problem a farmer has to deal with is crop failure. Think with me. A good farmer never prays for rain. A good farmer never prays for rain. A good farmer prays for a good harvest. And he lets God decide when it's going to rain. Hello? You know, some of you are staring at me like a cow caught in a headlight. Huh? Now, I want you to think about this. Here in Kentucky, you can grow one crop of corn a year, right? But if you don't make it, if you got a crop failure, then you've got to have enough stored up for the second year. Is that correct? But I live in Orlando, Florida. From Orlando, Florida to the tip of Florida, we can grow corn 3 times a year. We only grow it 2 times a year because it's only economic. You see, in the spring, we harvest corn in April and May, and we ship it up here because you would like to have some fresh corn, and you ain't got any. But in the summertime, you've got your own. But in the fall, when you run out of it, we harvest again in October and send it up here because you're willing to pay the freight. So we grow corn twice a year in Florida, but we could grow it 3 times a year. It's just it's not economic. Down in Florida, down around Lake Okeechobee, we grow radishes on a 48-day rotation. You can plant it, harvest it, 28 days later, then plow the ground and plant it again. But that's what it was like before the flood. Before the flood, because of human sin, you will have to toil to get your food, but food is going to be plentiful. Yes, you have to plant it, you have to water it, fertilize it, you've got to harvest it. But there's no such thing as a crop failure. Hello? Imagine that in Kentucky, impossibility of crop failure. And that you could grow more than 1 rotation a year, too, okay? So this is another reason why people used to live to be 900 years old. But that humidity, it has other benefits as well. Now, I would think you might have noticed, but because of humidity in the atmosphere, it would block out UV radiation. Now, I want to say this to you all very seriously. Regardless of whether it's summer or winter, I don't care. You, every time you're outside, should be wearing sunglasses with blue blocker. Blue blocker means that the glasses are coated to block out ultraviolet light. So I am telling you, as a wise father, every time you're outdoors, I don't care what time of the year it is, you should be wearing sunglasses with blue blocker coating. Why? Because ultraviolet light kills things. Is there anybody here that's old enough to remember, and I know there are, how many of you here are old enough to remember when men used to have barbers and women had hair salons? Yeah, I better see the older ones raising your hands here. Certainly when I was a child, they did. Now, why don't we do this anymore? Do you remember there was a time that in the men's barbershops and the women's hair salons, they would use the same comb, same scissors from client to client. But to prevent bacteria and lice being transferred from one client to the next, they used to put it on this little block. You know, there's this little... So, they had this little rectangular box, 5 sides, one side was open, and the 5 sides inside the box, it was mirrors, and inside there was this blue light. Anybody remember those? And they used to take the combs and the scissors, they used to put them in the little box with the 5 sides and mirrors and a little blue light. What was that? It was an ultraviolet lamp. And it's the way we sterilize combs and scissors, but today we use chemicals and disposables, correct? Why don't we use that anymore? Because ultraviolet light was a great method of sterilizing combs and scissors in barbershops and so forth. Why don't we? Because we found out that the men and women working in those shops were getting cataracts faster than other people because ultraviolet light causes cataracts. So if you want to slow down the progression of cataracts in your eyes, I'm speaking to the younger ones here particularly, you always want to wear sunglasses with blue blockers when you're outside. It's not for style, it's for health. Hello? Well, that extra moisture in the atmosphere before the flood was helping to lessen the amount of ultraviolet light getting through, which would allow you to live longer. Are you with me? And before the flood, there were no volcanoes, no earthquakes. The first, at least significant volcanic earthquake activity began at the time of the flood when the earth cracked open. Now, today, volcanoes kill very few people. Now, back on Sunday morning, May the 18th, 1980, 57 people died at the eruption of Mount St. Helens, but they died from terminal stupidity. Well, they were told not to be there. But you know, there's always those people who say, I know better, right? Well, that morning, 57 people said, I know better, and because of that, 57 people died needlessly. But what's interesting about it is, in God's grace, the volcano erupted and blew north into a forest and only killed 57 people. If it had blown west that morning, it would have killed at least 50,000. But today, because we know enough about volcanoes to look at the earthquake activities and so forth building up to a major eruption and we have a warning system. Very few people die from volcanoes today, correct? But today, people still die a lot from earthquakes. I mean, how many of you have woke up, you're going to go to class or you're going to go to church or something, you turn on the radio, the TV, and there's an announcement about how there was an earthquake in Turkey and 10,000 people died that day because their housing simply isn't very good and it simply crumbled in and buried them. I mean, that just happened recently in Turkey. Well, earthquakes still kill a lot of people today, but volcanoes don't really kill very many people today. But tell that to Pompeii in the year 79, right? By the way, it's a marvelous place to go. We discover new things at Pompeii every single day. We've only scratched the surface of what's there. It's such a huge city and marvelously preserved. But it was still a very tragic event, correct? Well, and again, natural pollution. I want to discuss that with you. You know, environmental terrorists like Igor, that's my pet name for Al Gore. Environmental terrorists like Mr. Gore, well, they tell you, you know, we've got to sequester everything, we've got to shut it down, we're supposed to stop pollution so forth while he's polluting, correct? Come on, I'm just Dr. Reality here. But people think that nature is pristine. But nature is not pristine. Nature is actually dirty. The fact of the matter is that dust storms, forest fires, volcanoes, and even the organisms that live in the ocean are causing air pollution. It isn't just people. Do you realize that one volcano erupting on the Earth in 1 year pollutes the atmosphere more than all humans in 1 year? Think with me for a moment. 1991, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines put out an estimated 20 million tons of aerosols and particles into the atmosphere, and because of that, it cooled the Earth 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit in 1 year. Volcanic activity always cools the Earth. And volcanoes pollute the Earth more than anything. However, the number two thing is phytoplankton in the oceans. These are little one-celled plants that live in the ocean. Now, I don't know, but they're causing pollution. And they cause the pollution that actually causes a decrease in the ozone in the upper atmosphere, what they call sometimes the ozone hole. Now, actually, there's two that we know of. It's just not one, but they aren't holes. They aren't holes. There's no such thing as an ozone hole. There's an area of ozone depletion, but it does not go all the way through. It's not a hole. Are you with me? It lasts for about 6 to 10 weeks and fills right back in. It's no big deal. Natural things that God knew about and put in action, correct? But these little plants in the ocean, these little one-cell plants, they produce chemicals that destroy the ozone. So would you want to get rid of them if you could? Would you want to? Well, maybe you don't understand. Because you see, those little one-cell plants in the ocean produce more oxygen than all the plants on land on Earth. I don't know about you, I like to breathe. It's my preference anyway. But nature pollutes. It isn't just people, and nature pollutes more than people. And nature is not pristine. Now, before the flood, there was certainly far less pollution. People were not significantly contributing, of course, but the weather conditions also would have prevented much of the pollution that we have after the flood. But of course, pollution is not good, and this is another reason people used to live longer, correct? So these are scientific reasons. But let's think, what are the additional differences that are medical that occurred before and after the flood that allowed us at one time to live to be 900 years old? Well, you'll remember I mentioned that Genesis 1, 29 and 30, God created us as vegetarians. At that time, it was a perfect diet because we had a perfect immune system. You couldn't get sick. We had a perfect digestive system. You could perfectly digest the food. God made the food, the vegetation, perfect with all of the things that we would need to survive, right? However, because of human sin, the plants start to decay just like we are decaying. And at the time of the flood, God knows this is going to happen. And so because of the decay and because roughly 90 to 95% of all plant species that lived before the flood are now extinct, Well, because of that, the plants can no longer provide us everything we need. And I mentioned Genesis 9:3, I think, didn't I? Now you shall eat meat. Remember that most vegetarians do get animal proteins and amino acids from things they eat that are animal products, such as milk, cheese, and so forth. They don't eat meat. Typical vegetarian really might eat fish or fowl, but they don't eat red meat. But a vegan diet, which is entirely vegetarian, is really a problem because you can't get the amino acids you need in the proper amounts. So you can supplement it, but just be careful. But we initially had a perfect diet, a perfect digestive system, a perfect immune system, correct? Well, isn't that going to make you live longer? So humans and animals, they were vegetarians to begin with because the plants did give us everything we needed. But because of the flood, that rule changed. And again, sometimes things have multiple benefits. Now, would you agree with me if you were out last night as the front was coming in, it was more humid? You will agree? And now let's think about this. When you have a foggy day here or a really rainy day here, doesn't the air just feel heavier? Agreed? And that's because it is heavier. You take a dry, square cubic foot, say, of air that's completely dry, and you start adding moisture to it, it literally gets heavier until it reaches a saturation point. Now, you know what that feels like down here. But remember at the time of the flood, there was the extra moisture up there, correct? Now, the extra moisture up there made the air up there heavier, and that increased the pressure on the surface of the earth down here. Now, I wasn't there, none of us were. Our best estimate scientifically is the atmosphere was 1.6 to 2.2 times the air pressure it is today because of this extra moisture in the air. Or we'll call it roughly double, okay? Now, what's the benefit of having double atmospheric pressure, and how do we scientifically know that it is true? Remember, we got to be able to back it up, right? Well, first of all, when we study air bubbles trapped in amber, we find that this is true. But why? Well, insects don't have lungs, nostrils, mouths. They don't breathe in and out the way we do. Insects breathe through little holes in the side of their bodies called spiracles. And the size of an insect is not how long it lives. The size an insect can get to depends upon the amount of oxygen it gets during its lifetime. And I'm going to share some things from evolutionary sources. Now, I am not afraid to share information from evolutionary sources because it backs up creation. Now, please notice, an oxygen-rich atmosphere allowed giant insects to grow 300 to 360 million, suppose, years ago. Dragonflies with wingspans up to 36 inches flourished in the Carboniferous period, supposedly 300 to 360 million years ago. Researchers had long suspected that the giant insects' lush force needed more oxygen than the level of 21% today. Well, think with me for a second. Roaches used to be 6 1/4 inches long. Apparently that doesn't bother you. Dragonflies used to have wingspans of 36 inches. Okay, apparently that hasn't sunk in. Okay, you get on the parkway heading into Lexington. You're doing 70 miles an hour. This insect with a 36-inch wingspan flies in front of you. I mean, you're talking about car wash. Possibly windshield replacement. You're on a motorcycle, I don't even want to discuss it. Plants and marine life preferentially take up certain isotopes of carbon and sulfur. Their absorption changes as the concentration of oxygen changes. That comes from Science magazine. Science is the second highest journal in the world for evolutionists. Analysis of these isotopes in ancient rocks shows that the oxygen content of the atmosphere peaked at 35% between 350 to 250 million, suppose, years ago. That comes from New Scientist, which is a vitriolic evolutionary scientific publication. And so here, evolutionists are talking about how there used to be up to 35% oxygen. That's not true, because if the oxygen content were that high, it would cause some serious problems with forest fires. However, what they are not taking into consideration is that what they're measuring was at double the pressure. So let's think about this. Even Time magazine, which is a publisher of evolutionary fairy tales, notice all the way back to 1997 says that there used to be 50% more oxygen. Well, that's 20 to 30, because of air bubbles trapped in amber, right? Now, this is an experiment done at North Carolina State University, which is not a Christian university, I assure you. It's very secular. And this was published, a research article in New Scientist, which again is an evolutionary scientific publication. What did they do? They took ginkgo plants, raised them in an artificial atmosphere, 5 times the carbon dioxide of today, 1.5 times the oxygen content of today. Supposedly, the atmosphere 145 to 66 million years ago, called the Cretaceous, but the plants grew 3 times faster than today. You start to see how extra pressure is actually beneficial. And I'll show you some other benefits, but I want you to think about this for just a moment. Today, again, there are environmental terrorists, and they want us to lower our carbon footprint. Is that right? As they say, they want to sequester carbon dioxide. They want us not to burn oil, coal, natural gas, etc., right? But please tell me, please, what do plants use to make food? Good answer, carbon dioxide. What do trees use to make wood? Y'all have got to learn how to take a test. You're out of college, come on. The professor will often give you the answer in the question or in the previous answer. So what do trees use to make wood? Carbon dioxide. By sequestering carbon dioxide, we are starving millions of people on Earth to death. Now, we should not be wasteful. God wants us to be good Christian conservationists, to use the resources He has given to us wisely. But we ought to be burning as much coal, oil, natural gas as we can if it is for a useful purpose. Because the plants would just absorb the carbon dioxide. And they would make food, and they would make wood. And in a growing population, don't you need more food and more wood? Now, I hope I'm not going to hurt anybody here, but you didn't just have breakfast, you only just had a snack. And as you can see, when you have sugar things for snacks and you come to hear somebody speak, well, sugar puts people to sleep, you know? Anyway, so I hope I'm not offending you, but this is a photograph of actual human red blood cells in capillaries. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, again, you can take your right hand, pound your left chest, okay? Because what I'm about to share with you comes from Kentucky. First of all, if you double the atmospheric pressure, well, remember, red blood cells carry oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, correct? You know that. However, if you double the pressure, it isn't just the red blood cells that carry the oxygen in and the carbon dioxide out. It also includes the serum, the fluid. And so if you have double atmospheric pressure, you have more oxygen coming in, more carbon dioxide coming out. Think with me, Adam was commanded by God to tend a garden, but the garden stretched from Damascus, Syria to Egypt. Think with me, Adam could have run a marathon and not get winded. Hello? Because he had double oxygen in his system, right? Now, the reason I mention that, and I do not want to bring up negative thoughts, and I'm sorry if any of you were directly connected, but I would ask if any of you remember January 2, 2006, the Sago coal mine. That happened just next door here in West Virginia, and 13 miners were in the mine. 12 of them died. They died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, what happens when you die from carbon monoxide poisoning? Well, red blood cells, the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, likes carbon monoxide more than carbon dioxide or oxygen. And so what happens is, if you die from carbon monoxide poisoning, the cells get saturated with carbon monoxide, and they will not carry oxygen in or carbon dioxide out, and you die from asphyxiation. Now, 13 miners were in the mine. 12 of them died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Only one, Mr. McCloy, survived, and he was at the point of death. But the reason he survived is he was in another part of the mine. He was separate from the other 12. And when we found him, he was dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. And what's the first thing we did? We slapped pure oxygen on his face. We evacuated him out by helicopter to a hospital, and then we put him in one of those. It's called a hyperbaric chamber. Hyperbaric meaning high pressure. Now, I'm not sure where the closest one in to here, probably Lexington, but I'm not sure about that. There may be others closer. But what do we do in a hyperbaric chamber? We put your body in this chamber. We seal it up tight. We double the pressure, hit you with 100% oxygen. It takes 3 to 4 hours. We have to pump up the pressure slowly and change it to 100% oxygen, treat you for a couple of hours, and then we have to bring you back down, and then we let you out. But this is really beneficial. Now, initially, it was developed for burn patients, but I want to show you some other uses. In Germany, they use it for treating stroke patients and have almost near miraculous benefits. Many stroke patients basically recover 100%, and it only takes 3 weeks of treatment. Or, for instance, in England, MS patients, some of them work very well with hyperbaric oxygen. In France, we treat arthritis, vascular sclerosis, necrosis, advanced liver diseases, plastic and cosmetic surgery. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, but I want to prepare you for what you're going to see. I will not show you the pictures of what she looked like before the surgery. But there was a woman in France a few years ago that had her face transplanted. Hello? We would never have attempted to replace somebody's face if we didn't have hyperbaric oxygen. Today in surgery, we know how to sew the little tiny vessels together and so forth. We can do the surgery, the microsurgery to do that. But you've got to keep the tissue alive until circulation is, recovered. And so how do you do that? You can only do that with hyperbaric oxygen treatments. Now, I will not show you a picture before her surgery. She was mauled by some dogs, ripped her face off, pretty much. She died 2 years ago, I'm sorry to say, but nonetheless, in 2005, after the surgery, you can see where they literally replaced her face, cut it off right here, and put a new cadaver face on, and it stuck. And she only died a couple of years ago. But we know of one man and a second woman where we have literally transplanted a face onto them. But we would never attempt this without hyperbaric oxygen. But think about it. Before the flood, we were living in a hyperbaric condition. Now, again, in Japan, they treat sudden deafness, sudden blindness with hyperbaric oxygen. Also, in Sweden, diabetic gangrene, Berger's disease. Also, in Belgium, the reimplantation of extremities that have been cut off. People lose a finger, an arm, a foot, a leg, and so forth. We know how to sew them back together. But you have to have hyperbaric oxygen to keep the tissues alive until circulation is regenerated. And in India, they're treating leprosy. Now, leprosy is a disease similar to diabetic gangrene and necrosis because it destroys the nerves and destroys the circulation. But hyperbaric oxygen can really help them. Again, notice here, this was all the way back to the year 2000, 23 years ago, El Paso, Texas. Some cerebral palsy patients react very well to hyperbaric oxygen. Here, the nausea that some people get from anesthesia is cut in half simply by giving them a hyperbaric treatment. Or here from New York, autism, other neurological disorders, and this goes back 21 years ago. And the hyperbaric chambers, of course, have advanced quite a bit since that one. That's an early one, and of course, again, it was invented for primarily burn patients. This is a one-person sit-up hyperbaric chamber. You can actually sit in this while you're getting the treatment. Michael Jackson actually owned one of these in his home to keep his nose on. I'm serious as a heart attack. Michael Jackson's nose had had so many operations there wasn't anything holding it on. And he had to have hyperbaric treatments at home to keep his nose on. I'm serious, okay? Now, how many of you are interested in sports? Come on, some kind of sports? Well, a few of you. Now, let's think about this. All professional athletic teams and major college programs have hyperbaric chambers in their training facilities. Why? Because we have a valuable commodity. You know, these days, professional athletes and college athletes of a high caliber, they're a valuable commodity. And if they are injured, and I don't mean broken legs so much, but as sprains, strains, and that kind of thing, you want to get them back out on the field, back out on the court, back out on the rink as quickly as possible, correct? Well, they take hyperbaric treatments because they heal twice as fast. And they'll get back out on the court quicker. Many professional athletes have had this kind of treatment. And so I want you to think about this. Hyperbaric treatment has many health benefits. Now, if you haven't picked out one yet that's of interest to you, maybe this little list would help you. So, for instance, living in a hyperbaric environment with double the pressure, double the oxygen in your system, well, number one, it would help to restore memory. Any students here? Yes, it would help to restore memory. Hello? Or it would increase energy. Anybody here like to have more energy? For those that are married, it would increase zest in older men and women. I'll leave it at that. And it helps to reduce the time to heal from burns. Now, in the United States today, we have approximately 15 or 16 medical treatments that are approved using hyperbaric oxygen. But around the world, it's 30 or 40 because our FDA doesn't approve it as much, even though they should, for treating various things. But extra oxygen heals things. When you're injured, you benefit from extra oxygen and, of course, extra zinc, because zinc, again, is a very big thing in healing. But think about it. Before the flood, you are walking around in a hyperbaric chamber. If you had broken a leg before the flood, instead of taking 6 to 8 weeks to heal your broken leg, it would have taken 3 to 4. Well, certainly you would have lived longer, too. Is that correct? And remember, I mentioned that the water above, some of these things have multiple benefits, right? Well, another benefit of this moisture up there is it would help to reduce the amount of X-ray radiation coming in from outside. Now, I think you all know X-rays basically are bad if you get a bunch of them, right? Now, I want you to think about this. X-rays are like little tiny bullets. When an X-ray goes through your body, it leaves a little hole right through your body. But because when you're young, your body knows how to fill in the hole. But what happens if you keep being shot with little tiny holes for a long time? Well, the body sort of forgets how to fill them in, you know. But let's think about this for a minute. X-rays are like little tiny bullets. They go right through you, unless they hit a bone. Now, that extra water vapor in the atmosphere, it would help to reduce the amount of various kinds of deadly radiation. It would help to reduce the UV. It would help to reduce the X-ray, but it would also help to reduce gamma radiation and so forth. Now, you know radiation can be deadly and can kill, correct? So X-rays, in particular, are very bad on skin. So those little tiny holes, the skin starts to forget how to fill in the hole, you know. Now, I drove up here from Orlando, Florida to be with you. In Florida, we have only two kind of people who live in Florida. Now, we have millions of guests and so forth that come and go, but there's only two kinds of people that actually live in Florida. There are those who stay in the air conditioning and have just a mild tan, like me, and then there's the burnt offerings. You know, there are people who come down, they walk on the beach 6 days a week, and by the time they're 50, their skin looks like old leather, correct? Because when you move to Florida, you look like that. But if you walk on the beach 6 days a week for a few years, you look like that. But it is biblical. After all, Job says in Job 16:8, "Thou hast filled me with wrinkles." So it is biblical, correct? But that extra moisture, again, would help to reduce and therefore increase longevity, correct? Now, the higher humidity explains a lot of things about how people used to live to be longer in longevity, right? But again, what's one of the things that people will, doctors will tell you? You need to get rid of the stress in your life, right? But let's think about this. Before the flood, well, there was no rush hour, and I realize that here there's no rush hour either, but I'm just, Okay, if you want to know about stress, I went to high school in the District of Columbia, driving in the District of Columbia. I have driven in Rome, and I have driven in Sao Paulo, cities of 25 million people. I have driven in Moscow, a city of 25 million people. Believe me, driving in those cities is stressful. Hello? But there was no rush hour. There was available food. You didn't have crop failures, no catastrophic weather. You had fewer health problems, of course. We've been talking about that. A perfect and then near perfect immune system, a near and then imperfect digestive system and so forth. But you didn't have high population densities. And so there was less stress in your life before the flood. Well, that might be one reason why you would live longer. Is that correct? Okay. And then, of course, I mentioned the low population densities. That's less stressful and so forth. Now, there was also no wild animal or Indian attack. Now, I can say this because I am a North American Indian. I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma with full voting rights. And so I can say Indian attack without any recourse. But there was no wild animal attack, so you didn't have to worry about wild animal attack. Because remember, Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 and 30, God created the animals as vegetarians, right? Never, ever get your education from the National Geographic. And never, ever get your education from Hollywood. Now, how many in this room, I don't care how young or how old you are, but how many in this room have been subjected to at least one or more of the Jurassic Park movies? Uh-huh. Those movies are not science. Those movies are not even science fantasy. They are not even science fiction. They are simply pure propaganda. They're propaganda, and the people who made them say so. They are entertainment, we'll give them that, they're entertaining movies, but they're pure propaganda, and the movies themselves are not even consistent with evolutionary theory, but they're pure propaganda. Dinosaurs didn't attack people, they didn't eat people, they didn't eat each other initially in a perfect creation. Now that changed later because of human sin, but initially they were vegetarians. And this is why they could be on the ark with Noah. Dinosaurs were on the ark with Noah. There are 12 references to dinosaurs or their relatives in the Old Testament. You will find the last one in Micah, but there are 3 in Isaiah, for instance, others in Psalms. But there are 12 references to dinosaurs and their relatives, as we would see them from an evolution standpoint, that are mentioned in the Old Testament. But we have human literature, human artifacts, human art to prove that people and dinosaurs have lived together into contemporaneous times. The last known live dinosaur to be found on Earth was reported by an evolutionist in 1883. Now, I think when an evolutionist tells you they saw a live dinosaur in 1883, it kind of tells you they didn't become extinct 65 million supposed years ago. Hello? I mean, even they wrote about it. But we find history, written history of dinosaurs living until 1883. We find art, artifacts on 5 continents, whether they're figurines in Chinese tombs, Stegosaurus on a temple at Angkor Wat, whether there's 33,500 pre-Columbian clay figurines in Mexico. It doesn't matter where we look, cave art, etc. People and dinosaurs did live together. The idea that dinosaurs became extinct 65 or 70 million years ago is absolute fiction. But again, we didn't have to worry about animal attack or Indian attack, either one. And so people are going to live longer. Now remember, people used to live to be 900 years old. We can defend that medically and scientifically. But it's not just one factor, it's 19 taken together in combination. Now, why don't we live to be 900 today? because those factors either do not exist today or they exist to a lesser extent today. And this is why we only live 1/10 as long as we used to live. You've got to have the information to defend the Bible, because this is one of the things that evolutionists will attack you on right up front. How can you possibly believe the Bible? How can you possibly believe that people used to live to be 900 years old? Because they can read it. They just don't believe it. But we've got to be able to defend it. And I would hope at least you'd remember a few of these 19. We do have a book and a video with all of them, but I'm just hoping you will remember a few of them. We've got to be able to defend this thing. So I hope you've enjoyed our second session. I'm going to release you to whoever's going to take over. I'm not sure who is. Sir David. Everybody give a big